Hey performer, welcome to the Creatively Performing Arts podcast. Are you ready to get back to your creative passion for singing, acting, and dancing again? Hi, I'm Estelle, beginner voice coach, performer, and Christian creative, and I know how it feels to want to use your God-given gifts, but to stay stuck in fear. The solution is to just get started. So, in this podcast, you'll find beginner singing and performing tips, inspiring interviews with artists, and help to push past your fear so you can finally start performing again. So pause your Broadway playlist and take a vocal rest, because the show is starting and you're the star of it. Let's begin. Hey guys, all right, you're back. You're ready for part 2 of this incredible interview with Philip and Emma of the NWAY to Broadway podcast and blog. We're going to continue on with their story of really how they said yes to what they felt like God was leading them towards. But before we jump into that, I do want to remind you that honestly, as you're listening to these shows, and yes, you're listening to this interview because you want to be inspired, because you know you have a gift in you that needs to come out, and that's amazing. But I don't want it to stay there or to end there. I want us all to be taking action, right? So don't let what you hear, what you're inspired by, end here. Don't let it die here, okay? Take action. And I want to encourage you to take action this week by coming to this free, beautiful workshop that I'm doing. I'm hosting on Zoom. It's going to be live. And it's going to be all about building confidence, starting to build confidence as you sing and you perform. So if you're aspiring to start singing, you think you want to start singing, but you don't know where to start because you're feeling like you lack confidence, right? The reason that you're like I want to start singing, but I don't even know where to start. I don't really feel confident in my voice. If that's you, this is the show to be. This is the place to be. This is absolutely the show to listen to, but this is a workshop that is for you specifically, and for anyone who grew up singing in choir. If you love theater, if you love performing, and you just want to get back into that, and you're not really sure where to start, you're lacking in confidence in your singing voice and your performance ability and your stage presence, even though it's a virtual workshop, trust me, you're going to learn so much about how to start singing, how to get comfortable in your singing voice, and how to also get comfortable on stage, putting yourself out there online or social media if you want to share song covers or songs that you've written, things like that. So I would love for you to join us. It's going to be a free workshop, and it's going to be on Zoom this Thursday, February 2nd at 7 p.m. So come on over and join us. You can go to the link in the show notes where it says sign up here. Go to that link to sign up and enter your email, and that's it. You just have to put in your email and your name, and it's going to be great. And then you're in. You can also just join the Facebook group down below, the Performing Arts Community on Facebook, and that will also automatically get you in, okay? So come on over. Don't let your inspiration die here. All right, take action and start singing, start performing today, this week, okay? It's going to be great. And I can't wait to see you there. All right, so without further ado, let's get into part 2 of this interview. We're going to continue on with Emma really sharing her story of how, she really took a step of faith, and God paved her path for her to really start using her creative gifts in a way that she wasn't really expecting. So listen in, let's get into it.
I think what's interesting is in at the time, and I think Philip would probably agree with this, at the time, I didn't even know that I was saying yes to God in a lot of scenarios. I don't know if I was spiritually mature enough to know that the decisions that my spirit, at the time I didn't know it was my spirit, but the decisions that the spirit led me into were even ones of obedience. I think I just made a decision, and the God of the universe was present and active in my life. So I think sometimes I can look back at my story and be think that I was aware that God was leading me somewhere. And sometimes he has been. Sometimes he's been very clear, this is where I need you and this is where I want to use you. But I also think there's a world in which God works. It's funny. It's God gets creative with our obedience and is I'm just going to slowly but surely, one step at a time, lead you somewhere else, which is equally, it's a way he can work too, which is also beautiful.
I love that quote. God works creatively with our obedience. Just highlight that, star that. That's so good. I love that. Philip, were you going to say something?
No, okay. Emma's just so good with words, and I'm just thanks.
I love that. That was so good. Okay, well, speaking of God, being creative with our obedience, I want to know everything about Narrow Way to Broadway, how that came to be. Again, like starting something new, like you said, you didn't know the podcasting industry, and then now here you are working in it, doing all these cool things in it years later. But what did that beginning look like for both of you? Where did that all start, and how did Narrow Way to Broadway become what it is now?
Whew. Well, I'll start with the birth of Narrow Way to Broadway happened in my dorm with our friend Michaela, my freshman year. That's where the name was created. I think her mom honestly came up with it, which is like classic Michaela and Kathy, Kathy Martirosian things. But we really did it our freshman year because we were like Emma was saying, like there was this we came into our college thinking that we weren't going to find other people that were believers like us. And then me and Michaela realized, wait, there are people that are believers, and maybe we want to create something for other Christians that are believers that don't have what we have here at Coastal, and to create stuff that we knew our friends would, engage with, that would help them in their faith potentially too, but also really just to keep us accountable to our faith of, being in the Word, looking at what we were reading in that week, just in our own private quiet time, was doing in our lives and in moments in theater and plays that it, brought to memory, and how we can connect those two things and bridge the gap between faith and the performing arts a little bit. Then, of course, as all things do in college, that died after like after like 2 years, because we got busy and life just moved in different directions, but we were still super engaged with Christian community. And then Emma, you take off from here, because this is where you come into the story.
Yes. So I wasn't even around at Coastal when Narrow Way to Broadway originally started as a blog, because I hadn't transferred yet, and Caleb and Philip were a year ahead of me. So I don't really, it's so funny. So basically what I knew was that Coastal had a really good Christian community. Philip and I were good friends. We lived together my junior year, his senior year. So we just had a lot of conversations about like faith and whatever. There was a lot of built in like friendship and accountability for this group that we had. And then I guess we just kind of like kept in contact, would chat every once in a while. Philip is like, this is just an affirmation, so good at keeping in contact with people. Like I would randomly get a call from Philip like every other week, just be like, what's up? How are you? And I'm like, this is so great. My friend called me. But continuing those conversations, at the time, Philip was at the Greenbrier. I was in Chicago auditioning all the time. Like that's basically what my job was. So just continuing these conversations that we were consistently having. And at the time, like I really had no friends. I was like in Chicago, didn't know anybody. I had maybe one friend. So I remember, I will never forget this. Like I remember I worked at a gym in Chicago at the time. I worked in the kids club so that I could get a free gym membership, as one does. And I'm not going to say this was the spirit, because it might have been, but I don't want to like act like I knew it at the time if I didn't. But I just remember being like, you know what? I think Philip and I should start a podcast, and I think it should be called Narrow Way to Broadway. And I remember I don't know if I texted you, like, did I text you a voice memo or did I text you like text?
I think you texted me and were like, have you considered bringing back, like doing anything with Narrow Way to Broadway? And
yes.
I think at that moment I called you because I was driving around. I like can still see in my mind's eye our first conversation. I was driving around because I always just call people when I'm driving.
Yes.
And you texted me that, and I called you immediately, and I was like, what are you talking about? But I can like see the mountain like vistas of West Virginia that I was driving through. It's a sunny day.
Right.
And I was like, well, I mean, I'm not doing much here other than singing in the casino at night.
We can give it a go
with this jazz band. So
yeah. And that's the funny thing too, is that like, we didn't know, like the podcast industry, it's like so funny to even call it an industry, because it is now, but at the time it totally wasn't. Like,
no,
we thought starting a podcast was like it was just like this fun thing we were going to do. And we didn't even know how. So
I didn't
like
even listen to podcasts.
No idea. I like listened to like true crime podcasts, and we didn't even know how to do any of the tech stuff, none of the recording, none of the distribution. But this was a moment where I think we said yes to God before actually knowing what we were doing. It was like a daily bread moment where, yeah, we started like texting all of our friends about it, that we were starting this podcast. We were like praying about it constantly. And we like picked a release date without having any episodes recorded and without having any equipment. And we were like, but this is when it will come out, May 1st.
A leap of faith.
A leap of faith. It truly was. And
in the pandemic, it just happened. So we're like sitting
at home.
You were still in Chicago. Were you in Chicago?
No, I wasn't. I remember recording my first episode with John Jorgensen for season 1. And I was in my childhood bedroom.
Wow. It's incredible.
Like, it just was crazy.
Me too.
Yeah. And
we had nothing else to do.
No, we had nothing else to do but pray about NWAY to Broadway and interview people. And like, there is so much that the Lord did in that season of NWAY to Broadway. And the Lord is continuing to work in amazing ways for NWAY to Broadway, just like with its continuation, with its visibility. But like, it is crazy that we started this totally on a whim almost. And it was prayerful and it was thoughtful. And that's what I will say. Like, it was prayerful, thoughtful, and obedient, but it wasn't like super, like there
wasn't much vision attached to it.
No, like, we didn't have a lot of know-how. We had hopes for it, but we just remember we were just amazed because our main prayer for season 1, and it continues to be our main prayer from NWAY to Broadway, is like, bring the people on our show, like give the people who need to be on our show and share their story the courage to say yes to an interview. And it has been amazing. The people who have, come on our show, the timing, like just with even current events that the Lord has enabled us to have conversations with the right people at the right times about the right things before we even know why. And it's just been such a gift. So that's sort of how NWAY to Broadway started. I mean, it was so fun and so like such a gift, but I wouldn't say we like really felt like God was preparing us. We didn't know that God was preparing us for it until like, honestly, season 3 or 4, in my opinion. So, yeah.
And honestly, during that season, like just personally, the level up of just faith that God was given to me, like, I don't know. I grew up in a church that, like we didn't really talk about the Holy Spirit much. Like I've just left West Virginia and I'm back home in my childhood bedroom and I'm like getting blown up by the Holy Spirit every single day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is insane. And, I'm working in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru that I couldn't get a job at in high school, like making $8 an hour, 40 hours a week. And there's like all this sort of stuff that's happening. But like, I even had a moment, like 2 weeks ago in my journal that I'm taking notes in right now, where I literally wrote down like, God, take me back to the way that I felt about you when I was in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru in 2020, because like there was just something that God did in my heart, and I think yours as well, Emma, during this time, that was just like eye-opening to, maybe this is what, this feels so innately like what you have created me to be. Not necessarily that like the podcast is a part of that, but like I felt like I was stepping into the person that God created me to be in that season for the first time. And met Philip, that God calls Philip, calls son. Anyway.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Yeah, I think in parallel, quarantine was like, just instrumental, because I think in kind of unfolding in tandem with that was, I just remember this really strong conviction that the Lord put on my heart is, I think a lot of people, and I want to be like really humble in saying this because I think I fall into this temptation. I think a lot of people want to like educate other people on faith, when like it's really dangerous actually to like speak of matters of faith just because someone asked. Like if you don't actually know, I mean, I think about 1 Peter 3:15, it says, like, always be prepared to give an answer when someone asks you for the hope that you have. And I think about how much of that actually has to do with personal testimony, not like debating on theological matters. And so I think that the Lord was really convicting us that if we were going to claim to have any authority or have any expertise in theater or in faith in these conversations that we were having, like we needed to know our stuff. Like we needed to be in the word, we needed to be in prayer, we needed to be like covering the project with like words of affirmation and the Holy Spirit. That our like biggest fear, I think, through the whole thing, and our biggest like the biggest flaming arrow that I think the enemy could throw at us is just like thoughtlessly claiming to know anything. Like we're just out here trying to figure this out like everybody else. But I think what set it apart is like, I have never been in the word or in prayer than the season of starting NWAY to Broadway, in the same way of like, wait, I can't like start this podcast and expect or want anybody to listen to me if I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, so that actually started my quarantine experience right when we started NWAY to Broadway, is when I started reading. I read through the whole Bible for the first time, cover to cover. And it took me 2 years because I told myself, I'm not going to move on from a passage unless I feel like I actually understand it. So that's why it took twice as long as like the Bible in a Year plans. But I think, yeah, I agree with Philip in that, not necessarily just because of NWAY to Broadway, but NWAY to Broadway marked a significant season of spiritual growth and accountability in our lives, which was amazing and so necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. There's so much to say about what you guys are sharing. I love that what you said about, starting and then kind of needing to like grow into it as you're doing it, like growing in your faith as you're having these conversations. I feel like that's what I've been kind of in the similar boat. I started this podcast over a year ago, but when I started it, I was in medical school. And I don't know if I mentioned this when I was emailing you guys, but I was, not on the path that I knew that God had called me towards, but, I was kind of doing what looked good on the outside, what looked good on paper. Lots of backstory to that, as I've talked about on this show before. But I will say that when I started it, it was all about like staying creative while I was in med school. And then at the beginning of this year, when I kind of rebranded and was like, okay, I'm actually going to be a performer now. I'm actually going to go into the arts. And it was like, okay, like I need to be like intentionally taking action steps because I want to share with my community what it really looks like to kind of like start again and kind of be at the beginning stages of something that you want to do creatively. Even though I grew up in the arts as well and grew up doing theater too, but I kind of I never considered it professionally until God was like, oh no, you're going to be an artist and you're going to serve artists. And so I was like, okay, it actually holds you accountable when you start something like this, to be like, okay, I want to be intentional so that I can now share with other people too, how they can start being intentional in their own creative journeys as well. And at the same time, it grows your faith because you're taking a step of faith. And it's like, well, I could hold on to this podcast and this business, because my podcast is also like my voice. I have a voice studio as well online. And so I'm like, well, I could hold on to it and try to do it all myself, or I can remain in prayer and remain in faith. And kind of like you guys, like it's been a challenge that has forced me to trust God. Like I thought I knew how to trust God before. I also grew up in the faith. I also grew up, in a Christian home that was very full of, passion for God, full of faith, has been, still is full of passion for faith. But, I think challenges and circumstances in life, and when God calls you to start something, especially creatively, it really does force you to depend on him even more. And that is, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It can come from that. That's what's come out of NWAY to Broadway. And I just want to use that as an encouragement to anyone listening that it might not look like starting a podcast or starting a business or starting a, whatever. It could look like I'm going to try to start taking a dance class, or I'm going to try to start, learning to sing. I really like to start with like, I really like to think of like, what are some like simple, like small next steps that people can take if they're just like curious about their creative gifts, or they're just curious about starting. And I think that what they can take from your story about Narrow Way to Broadway is that, look, even if you're just starting like them, you don't know the whole vision, you don't know everything that's going to happen 3 years down the line, but set that release date, right? Get that first piece of equipment, sign up for that first acting class, go to that one audition, just one local, community theater audition, just start small and start somewhere, because you don't know what God can do with that one small step of seemingly small step of faith. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I love that.
For sure. And I don't know, Estelle, if you can hear the vacuuming happening in the background of my recording, but okay, that's great.
You're good.
I think too, like God also, the first step, this just came to me. I don't know if this is like, this will resonate with anyone, but also like the first step could be cutting back. Like, I think that a lot of people are like, I need to do more, and I need to start something, and I need to like create a nonprofit or start an initiative, or everybody's starting a podcast. It's like, there could also be a world in which like your step of obedience to the Lord is you saying no. Like, and I think that that's where, like, yeah, Philip, what you said about like, bring me the faith in the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. And I'm like, bring me the faith in my childhood bedroom when I was like 22, not knowing what my life was going to be. Like, I feel like there is so much obedience in simplicity. And then I think attached to that, it's funny because it reminds me of like the Simon Sinek book, which is like Start with Why. But I really do think something that's really important for us to ask ourselves, especially in such like a individualistic and visible forward facing society, is like, why do I want to do this? Like, do I want to do this because I genuinely feel like the Lord has put this desire inside of my heart? Or do I want to do this just because like I think it'll make me appear a certain way, or to satisfy my own restless desire? I think that's like a huge thing too, is like the world is telling everybody, like, if you don't do anything, if you're not about something specific, then like you are a failure, or you are you don't have concern for the things of the world. But I don't know if someone needs to hear that, but I feel like sometimes the step of obedience can be doing less.
Rest is, one of our greatest tools to go to war against the enemy, like choosing real rest, not laziness, but, really stepping into resting with God. That's probably came from a podcast that you produced, Emma, that I listened to, but
rest as resistance.
Rest as resistance. There we go.
Yep.
I love that. That's so good. Yeah, I think someone needed to hear that. I think I needed to hear that. I think we all needed to hear that, because, saying yes to the right things at the right time, and then saying no to the things that might look good, but aren't really for you, or maybe like not right now. It's so hard to decipher sometimes. But like you said, starting with the why, kind of that introspection, and then walking with God and say like, okay, why would this be, the best next step for me, or why not? So I love that. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. Because I do like to talk about starting and like getting people like, encouraged and motivated to really start, and to start small. But sometimes you do need to start with stopping, start with doing less of, what isn't for you at this time. So I love that. Thank you. So I would love to know, so kind of switching gears a little bit, but we're going to tie it into Narrow Way to Broadway before we wrap up. For the person who's listening, who's like, oh my gosh, they did like musical theater, they did theater shows after shows after shows after shows, and now they're producers, or maybe they're thinking, they are somehow being able to be strong in their faith while they're in the arts. Like, how is that even possible? Like, it can sound, kind of overwhelming at times, when you think about being a Christian in the arts, or when you think about, going into musical theater. So let's start with musical theater. So if someone's listening and they're like, where do I start if I want to explore musical theater? You know, you talked about Philip being in Greenbrier. I think that was like it was a resort that you were a performer in. Okay, because I've heard, like I said, I know some of your stories from listening to the show, but just got to clarify. And then of course, Emma, you were in Chicago, you were doing shows. So, but both of you guys grew up in community theater. So if someone's like, I don't even know where to start, but I do like, I don't know, I like theater, I like listening to Hamilton, I don't know, where do I begin? What would you say to them? Oh, let's start with Philip.
Great. Wow. Okay. Well, I would say number one, before, like, if you're loving theater, you're like really wanting to get involved, community theater is a absolutely beautiful place to be. Um, there's recently I've had the opportunity to kind of like step back in with community theater organizations and get connected to some in my area for the first time since I've moved here. And there's just something really refreshing to me coming from the professional sphere of stepping back into community performance and seeing people love each other in a different way.
Yeah.
And care, not that that isn't present in the professional field, like the theater community is strong in the
Yeah.
professional world. But when you see people, you know, in all ways, whether you're an artist or an engineer or a line cook at a restaurant, there's this level of creativity that everyone has inside of them. And to see people do something as risky as putting yourself literally in front of your community for free, where you are in a lot of times paying to be a part of these shows, and to seeing people put themselves out there and on the line in that way for the sole purpose of being in community and being a part of something with other people, but also having a creative desire inside of them that you just have to get out into the world. That's deeply inspired me in the work that I've been a part of. So if you're thinking about it, go audition for a community theater show and don't expect anything out of it. Don't expect to get cast. Don't expect to get cast as a lead. If you do get cast in the ensemble, enjoy every moment. Love the people, love the connections that you're making there, because it's one of the most vulnerable places I think that you can, become a part of in your community. Like, where else do you have people gathering around one common story and theme other than churches and religious organizations, where they're gathering around one narrative to tell it together, and they're putting in all this effort and work. Like, yes, sports teams have like the team aspect, but they don't get the vulnerability and the honesty aspect that I think we find a lot of times in theater or dance or art classes or pottery classes, and ways where you can creatively express yourselves in your community. So I say, go for it, expect nothing, and love the people, love the heck out of the people. And when conflict arrives, love even deeper. Yeah.
That's so good, Philip.
So good.
I'm like hype. I want to go audition for a community theater production now. Maybe I will.
It's amazing.
Yes, I agree. I honestly second all of that. I don't even really have anything to add other than when you get there, know that a lot of the time, like, people in the theater industry, we talked about this on an episode that we just released on NWAY to Broadway with a guy named Ryan, who is an artistic director at a community theater. And he talked about how a lot of the time people who are in theater end up there because they were burned or hurt by another community. And a lot of the times it was a community of faith. Like, a lot of the people, like, we always say this, but everybody has this God-shaped hole inside of their hearts. And a lot of people seek that. Sometimes people seek that in church and don't find it and are hurt by that. So then they seek it in theater. And actually, in some ways, it's pretty similar. It's a very communal, again, like Philip said, it's surrounding a narrative, surrounding like playing a role, an active role in a community. So I would also just say, like, when you get there, there are really tangible ways to like be a light to this community. We talked about it on our first episode of this past season of NWAY to Broadway, where we said there are just like three really simple ways to be a light in the community. And one was like resist the urge to tear others down in speech. That can be a really big temptation just in general, but also within the arts community, a community that's really subjective. 2 is be the first to arrive and the last to leave. Like, be a servant, come help set up the chairs, let someone borrow a pencil. I'm telling you, someone will forget their pencil. So bring extra pencils, like be the person to provide the pencils for the rehearsal. And then the third thing, right, Philip, was like, just be affirming. Like, if someone is doing a good job or if someone is serving you in a certain way, like, tell them, go up to them and say it. And that's a way. So echo everything that Philip said, just go do it. And then when you get there, keep those things in mind.
Yeah. I'd say like an example of the last one that really blessed me literally yesterday is I was at, my church's like volunteer appreciation party for the year for our volunteers at the church, and our campus pastor, who's like a actual friend of mine and like mentor of mine, came up to me. And I'm also on staff at the church. So like, I don't work for the church that I attend. I work for like the organization that helps. It's hard to explain. We're all the same church, many locations. But the location that I attend, the pastor is my friend, and he came up to me as like, looked me in the eye in a series, is like, I'm so grateful for what you do here. Like, you don't have to do this. And I'm like, oh yeah, like, yeah.
Thanks.
Like, yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Like, I really appreciate it. But in the moment, I'm like, well, that's kind of like, but then thinking about it in this moment, I'm like, that's really awesome. Like, I love that guy. And of course I'm going to serve and, be grateful for those words that he gave me, that he didn't have to give me. Cause I work,
right.
I work for the church. We're friends. He didn't have to say that anyway.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Yeah. That is so good. Thank you, both of you. I hope someone listening is like taking this in and it's about to go do a community theater audition and take all those 3 steps. Those were such good, you outlined that perfectly. I love that. I hope someone really does do that. And I mean, let's all go audition for a community theater. Now I really want to. Oh my gosh. But yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. I would love us to wrap up kind of talking about your vision for Narrow Way to Broadway and kind of relating to your point, Emma, about being a light in the community. You mentioned earlier in your story about how you didn't know that you could be a Christian and be like fully in the arts and like immersed in the arts, but you realized that you absolutely can be. And now you guys are both doing it. You're following God and how God is calling you to use your creative gifts, even in a professional level. And not everyone who's listening wants to do it professionally, but wants to use it in some way. And I love that either way. Mm-hmm. So I would just love to talk about a little bit about your vision for how you want Narrow Way to Broadway to really inspire people to be a light in the performing arts community, and what that looks like for you guys coming up, or, if you have projects coming up that you think will specifically speak to this, whatever you guys want to share.
You kick it off.
Okay. Yeah. Gosh, this is like my most favorite question to entertain and answer, but it's also the question I have to be like so open-handed with the Lord with, because obviously Narrow Way to Broadway is like such a passion project for us. And it's grown and we have seen God in every single step of it. And if it were up to me, like, I would just want to do Narrow Way to Broadway full time. Like, I'd want to quit my job and like do Narrow Way to Broadway, develop like so much curriculum to really equip people to put these things in action. And I think that actually where we see Narrow Way to Broadway going, where we pray Narrow Way to Broadway will go, because we're on the 6th season of audio. So we have a lot of audio content, but we really want to equip people to put these things into practice in community. So we're praying about, and we really invite your listeners to do the same, about creating more opportunities for in-person interaction with listeners. So whether that be starting a Narrow Way to Broadway Bible study where we write some kind of curriculum and people can do it in small groups, or do it virtually. I think ultimately we'd like to have a yearly Narrow Way to Broadway, like large gathering, like in a major city, maybe, yeah, like at my church in Chicago or maybe in New York or something, where anybody who's a Christian artist can come and gather and meet people and learn about theology and learn about faith and learn about theater. Like we just have this vision of people at this conference, like taking a class on the Trinity and then turning around and taking like an acting for the song workshop. And that's like our dream. But we need prayer over that. Like candidly, we're
you
not
imagine. Oh my
like,
gosh.
could you imagine? That would be amazing.
Sounds amazing. I would go.
Great.
Sign me up.
Our first sign up, Estelle. Yeah.
I'll be your first sign up. That's
Love
awesome.
it. Yeah. So that's kind of the hope. But more, shorter term, Philip, you can take this off. We actually recently, we're doing season 6 of the what's it called? The podcast wall. And then we have some other things too. Like we have some written things. So do you want to talk about contributors at all, Philip?
Yeah. So we have started a new thing, Narrow Way to Broadway Contributors, where we just kind of are trying to get people involved in the podcast. We've we've been doing this for ourselves for 2.5 years now, and we need help because we're in very different life stages and positions right now than we were when we started the podcast. And we want to be offering more for people. So we decided to create this contributors program where we're inviting people in to help us in any way they feel that they could help us. So right now that's primarily manifested itself in writers. So people that are creating blogs and other, written content that we'll be posting on our website, on our blog, and then promoting on our social media. We're looking for people to help with graphic design and Instagram reels, or just like literally whatever people could contribute, because running a social media account that people are, engaging with right now is a lot of fun, but it is a lot of hard work in addition to, a lot of the work that me and Emma already do, which is very digitally based and very similar to a lot of the work that we do with Narrow Way to Broadway. So, we've got contributors going right now. We've got, just shameless plug, a new line of merch. If you like merch and you like Narrow Way to Broadway, or you listen to the podcast and you like it, go get some merch. It's pretty affordable, makes a great Christmas gift. And, what else do we have going on? I know we're just continuing to create audio content right now, prayers, meditations, talk back style episodes. So
yeah, super cool. And just briefly, I can go over. So and we have interviews, which are just an interview with the Christian artist, a discussion of their story, a talk back episode, which is actually discussing a piece of art from a Christian perspective, usually with someone who is not in the arts. So usually that's a more like theologically heavy discussion through the lens of a piece of art. And then our prayers meditations are like 10 minutes guided prayer meditation. This season, we're following actual prayers from the Bible. So we recently did one on a prayer of faith, and on Monday, we're releasing one on Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel. So her prayer for a child. So yeah, those are kind of our formats.
Yeah.
And I would say like one more thing that I feel like just content wise that I'm seeing us lean more into, and that Emma said, we were praying for when we first created the podcast, is that like an artist even saying yes to do our podcast as an answer to prayer. Not only because we want to have people on the podcast to give people audio content to listen to, engage with, but also for an artist to boldly step forward and be willing to say, yes, I'm a believer, is a really big deal. And one thing I think we're seeing more is a lot less with these artists and people are coming on the podcast that's challenged me in my life is, like at the beginning, we were both kind of sharing our background information. And I think the Lord's been speaking a lot to me, through even editing our podcast, about how I have, in a lot of ways as artists, we claim our background information, our resume, as our testimony. But we're seeing people on Narrow Way to Broadway share their stories, what is not just what is real and true about them, but what is actual reality and what is, actually biblical truth that God is doing in their life. That's deep, very vulnerable stuff. And so I'm praying that people continue to feel, feel the ability to share deeply with us, and that we also in return, Emma and myself, can also, very deeply and very vulnerably share with the things that God's, teaching us in our own lives right now.
Yeah. So good. I love the pray and meditate episodes, I was going to say. And I think that, what you're doing is so important. Like you said about community theater being a place where people sometimes who've been burned by the church can go, you guys are creating like a space that, to me, it feels safe for people wherever they are in their faith journeys to feel like I can go here and hear about, this person's story, because they're an artist too, and I want to be in the arts, but I don't know about the faith thing, but maybe I can, listen and see. And because you guys, you make it so safe, I think a lot of people can, really see your light in that and see how you're shining the light of Christ and the love of Christ, and also, inspiring other artists at the same time. So I love that beautiful, it's a beautiful combination of being an artist and walking out your faith. And that is beautiful to me. That's what I hope that we all continue to do. It's what I want to encourage everyone to continue to do, is to let your creative expression be rooted in your relationship with God, be rooted in your faith. So that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for sharing what's going on. We'll put all your links in the show notes so everyone can, stay connected with you guys in a second. I do always ask, like, the last question is always, if you could give one small piece of advice to the artist, the creative who's listening, who, is considering maybe starting, going to a community theater audition, or considering maybe starting to get into podcasting or production, or getting into dance or singing. If you could just give them one tiny piece of advice. You guys have given so much already, but if you had one last thing that you wanted to say, you guys can go just like a sentence or two, no pressure. But
Yeah.
Philip, you want to start?
I'll go ahead and jump. Develop in the dark. The person that you are when you're at home sitting on the couch by yourself is who you are and who God loves. So take care of that person.
Oof.
That was good.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a mic drop. Gonna
Uh-uh.
clip that part like its own section.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I would say seek first the kingdom of God. Actually, like, not ironically, I really would say that my biggest piece of advice in pursuing a career in the arts is to seek first God's kingdom.
And that was also a mic drop. So we're going to cut that one too.
Love it.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. I feel like I feel inspired. I feel blessed. I feel touched. I feel like more deeply connected to God just in this moment, talking with you guys about your stories and hearing your advice. So thank you so much for sharing so openly and honestly and vulnerably. And thank you for talking to everyone. I can't wait to see where Narrow Way to Broadway goes. And if you wouldn't mind,
we can't either. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Who knows? Yeah. So go ahead and drop, let us know where we can find you, where everyone can find you individually, and then also on Narrow Way to Broadway. And I'll put everything in the show notes, and also the merch link and everything. Like, I'll put it all down there. So
Love it.
Thank you, Estelle. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. This was a blast.
Yes.
Yeah, check us out at NWAY to BWAY on Instagram and on Spotify and Apple Podcast.
Yes, it will all be in the links below. So thank you so much for joining again. You guys are both literally lights. Like, look at them smile. You guys can't see them, but they're smiling. You've been sharing your sharing your story, sharing your personality so generously. So thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for being a light. Thank you for what you're doing. Yeah, you guys are great.
Thanks for having us, Estelle.
You're the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Creatively Performing Arts Podcast. I hope you feel encouraged, inspired, and truly impacted by today's episode. And if you can think of one person who would love this show, please share this episode with a friend. And if you wouldn't mind going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a review and rating, it will take 30 seconds and it would truly immensely help the show grow and reach more people who need to use their creative gifts as well. And finally, go to the Performing Arts community on Facebook and join join this online free community for you to interact with and connect with other artists. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much, and I will talk to you later.